Welcome to the Arlington Street Church podcast. Founded in 1729, Arlington Street continues today as a gathering place for progressive people of faith in the greater Boston area and beyond. We are located at the corner of Arlington and Boylston Streets, across from the Public Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. Please visit ascboston.org for more information about this historic Unitarian Universalist congregation. Arlington Street Church, gathered in love and service for justice and peace.
Welcome to the Question Box Sermon. Stump the Chumps, Part 1. I am here with you today, and in a few weeks, Reverend Joanna Lubkin will be here with you to do Part 2. We have plenty of questions for Part 1. This sermon is a way for us to be in conversation with each other where you have offered the questions on your hearts, and I will do my best to answer from my heart. Our first question: define spirituality according to Unitarian Universalists. I'm going to go even bigger and define spirituality according to the broadest definition possible. We can think about religion as what we do together, who we are as a people when we gather in our institutions of congregations and our regional group and our Unitarian Universalist Association, which is just us all put together. And we think of spirituality as what we do as individuals and as congregations to connect with something greater than ourselves. SGTO, something greater than ourselves. So for some people that's God or goddess or the spirit. For some people that's a sense of community. For some people it's giving back to the world. For some people it's the Red Sox. For real, I've met folks in the hospital when I ask, what's getting you through? They're like, I just want to see how the Red Sox do this season. But whatever it is, it's something that's bigger than ourselves that we connect with as individuals and as a community to give our lives purpose and meaning. And it can be any combination of those things or other things than what I've mentioned. How do we incorporate the valuable lessons of the Bible from a UU perspective? I think for most of us, we might think of those stories and lessons the same way we might think about stories and lessons from other world religions, something that has a nugget of truth housed within a grander story that we might think of like a myth or like a wisdom tale that's been passed down. For others of us, we believe parts of the Bible literally. Some Unitarian Universalists have a more Christian theology, and some Unitarian Universalists, just like we have UU Buddhists or UU Christians, we have folks who claim multiple identities. And if there's a story from the Bible that you're really wrestling with and wondering, what in the world can I take from this? That's a good place to go to, look the story up and see what others have said about it. Is there a UU God? I don't know, is there? I think that there is not one single UU God, but in our church and in our congregations, in our tradition, we have a really big tent theology. We're a people of covenant, not of creed. And what that means is that we think it's more important to be together and to work together towards being in good relationship with each other, with ourselves, with each other, with our world, to work for justice, to go on the quest of meaning-making on our lives, and support one another towards spiritual growth in that quest. So even to question truly is an answer. And hopefully we have our own answers, so we have our own connection, perhaps with God, perhaps with something else, but we find what we can connect with. And then we share that with each other, and we talk to each other about it, and we say, well, wait, tell me more about that God you don't believe in, or tell me more about that God you do believe in. And maybe we learn from each other, and maybe we push each other to grow more. And I love church that we get to do that here. What can I do every day to work on my connection with my spiritual being? This is a two-part. So first, find what your heart loves. Because when you can be open to what your heart loves, then you can be open to more of yourself. And when you're open to more of yourself, then you connect with your spirit, or with that deepest part of who you are, or with that connection between yourself and a sense of the transcendent, the sense of something bigger than who you are. The second part of the question is, are there good prayers for beginners who do not believe in a traditional God? I've got a couple resources that you can check out. And probably if you just Google like UU prayers, you'll find them. But I believe there's a book by Eric Walker Wickstrom, and there's also a book by Kate Braystrup. And those both talk about prayer and spiritual practice from a tradition that's not necessarily theistic. But even more than that, because books can be helpful, but they're like sort of a coach or a hint along the way. And the same thing with asking your friends, like, do you pray? How do you pray? Tell me about that. Even more than that, Cynthia Bornstein, who's a Buddhist teacher and comes from a Jewish background, she says that a prayer is just a really, really big wish. It's just really, really wishing something. And I think that perspective can be helpful for those of us who might have grown up with a set idea of what prayer is, or might come to prayer now wondering, like, can I pray if I don't believe X, Y, or Z? To think, oh, I don't have to worry about all of those trappings. I can get in touch with myself. I can think about what is my deepest wish for myself, for my loved ones, for our world, and I can offer that up. For me, I've come to a place where I really like the word God. I don't believe that there's like a person up there. I believe that there's a sense of love that is bigger than any of us, that is connecting us and within us and just everywhere. And so for me, I will say in prayer with a sense of connecting with that great vastness of love and of life, and say whatever the prayer is on my heart. But a prayer doesn't need to be addressed to anyone. So if I were to just offer a prayer from my own heart right now that's not to any traditional God, I might say, sometimes life is really hard. Sometimes it feels like our world is falling apart, because it is. And sometimes I'm not sure that I have the answers or what to do next. And so I ask that I be held in my fears and in my inability to act, and I ask that I be given ways to keep moving forward. And I ask that for everybody who I love, that all of us might find what it is that we need to continue to do good in our world and to continue to be people who are loving and justice-seeking people. Blessed be. Does our liberal theology make room for or have the potential to become liberation theology? That is like the hardest question I've got in here, so whoever did that gets a gold star. So I want to just back up and say liberal theology comes from a place of the Enlightenment and a time when we were saying, like, the authority doesn't have the answers, we can find the answers in ourselves. So it has a strong sense of individualism still, a sense of freedom that means I can do what I want and you can do what you want, and a sense of we will use reason to figure out what the truth is together. Liberation theology, very brief primer from someone who's not a liberation theologian. Liberation theology says, what is the harm that's happening to people, and how do we help people find in community their power so that they might be able to, or we might be able to, move towards real justice. A real justice that's not like each of us is free to do what we want, but recognizes that some of us aren't free to do what we want, that people who are in cages at the borders and in our own state are not free to do what they want. It also says that God sides with the people who are oppressed. God, through history, God, through scripture, is with people who are hurting and is wanting to help people who are hurting be able to find their own power and help people who are enacting harm to find real freedom of stopping that harm and moving forward. I would need some real time to think through this question better of whether our tradition, which has come from a liberal theological history and often tries to move more and more towards liberation theological perspectives, but then we often get stuck. Our tradition is mostly white folks, and there's lots of historic reasons for that that include our white folks messing up in the past and still today. And so I think that we do have this impetus within ourselves, and people of color who have come have said, like, hey, if this is a church with a big tent for many theologies, here's my theology. Let's make room for it. So I think there is some movement that way. And I think for those of us who don't come from a liberation theological perspective, there's this concept that I love called holy envy, which means that we, from our own tradition, no matter what it is, and our own perspective, no matter what it is, can look at another perspective and tradition and say, like, I love that about that tradition. I envy that. And then we can learn from it and, depending on what it is, perhaps incorporate some of it into our own perspective if we can do it with integrity, and if we can do it in a way that has equity in the relationship. So I wonder about the concept of holy envy helping to make more space for people in our congregations who might have a hard time going towards liberation theology. And I would invite people to think about, what is it, if you learn more about liberation theology or know a lot about it, what is it in that you really are drawn to? And how can you learn from that? How can you welcome that into your own heart? How do I know I'm on the right path in life? Well, I was wrong. This is also the hardest question in the stack. I think that there are many ways. Well, I think first of all, if we are living lives that lack integrity, living lives that are perpetuating great harm in our world, living lives that feel like we're out of covenant, out of good relationship with those we love and with everybody, where we're not honoring our place in the interdependent web, that's a sign that something needs to change. Short of that, I believe there are many ways to lead a good life, that there's not one single right path in life. I don't even believe that there's one single right path for any individual. I started out my professional life as a sign language interpreter, and I loved it. And I was pretty good at it. In some places I was real good at it. And then I got to a place of realizing, oh, there's something about this that isn't quite fulfilling anymore. And I started to feel like I wanted to be more involved in caring. I was doing a lot of medical interpreting and felt like I wanted to be doing more caring for patients and families where I was able to speak up and be in direct conversation with them instead of just helping them have conversations with their doctors. And at the same time, I was starting to do the candles pew here at Arlington Street, and when people would share their candles, I had a sense of being honored that I was invited to hold their joys and their sorrows. And I started to realize, like, oh, maybe this is the next right thing for me. Not the only right thing, but the next right thing. And for me, coming into ministry has had a sense of taking all of the parts of my life and figuring out, oh, this is what they add up to. So I think that's one way to tell your own right path or your current right path is like, where does my life point me? Or what are the gifts that I have that I want to share with the world? What makes my heart come alive? I'm forgetting whose that quote is from, but what is it that makes me come alive, and how can I offer that to others? As a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, what was the biggest surprise of seminary and the biggest challenge? This probably sounds like a cop-out, but I loved seminary, and there wasn't one big challenge that stands out so much as like just the process, course by course and conversation by conversation of learning and growing in community. I think one of the things that I'm really remembering about seminary and that I really have valued going forward is that I'm a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, as this question rightly says, and I chose a seminary that was not a Unitarian Universalist seminary because I wanted to be in really deep relationship with Christians. I came from a part of the country where I didn't know too many liberal and progressive Christians. And I met some along the way here in Boston in the decade or so before I went to seminary, but I knew that I wanted to be in really deep relationship with my Christian colleagues and learn more about who they are and what they bring to the world. And I found real joy in that and real connection that I still value. Ministers spend a lot of time and energy caring for others. What specific things do you do to tend to and take care of yourself? And why do you ministers have the summer off? I think you have answered each other. Moving on. So ministers, you ministers don't all have the summer off. That's a particularly New England tradition. I don't know if this is real, but I've heard that it was because the Unitarians, who tended to be historically more wealthy, would go off in summer on the Cape or in Maine, and so the churches would just close. And the Universalists, who tended to be less wealthy, would go off to the fields and farm, and so the churches would close. But what we do is we have in our covenant as ministers with you, our congregations, agreements that we are with you doing the work that you see and the work that you don't see most of the time. And then we have 4 weeks a year of what is called study time, where we will not be like here in front of your face with you as the congregation, but we'll be on our own, perhaps studying and reading up on questions that have been on our hearts so that we can support you in conversation, perhaps learning new skills like working on our preaching or our pastoral care or our administration, perhaps planning out some time like sermon series or courses and workshops that we want to offer during the next year. So we have about a month for that, and then we also have a month of vacation time because ministers are not working a 9-to-5 job, and so that time off recognizes that we are sort of on call 24/7, often have one day off a week rather than two, and maybe not even that, and so it's a time to really be away and tend to our souls. Some of the things that I do to tend to my soul are yoga practice, walking in the woods, even just sitting under a tree. I also really love dogs and cats, and so being with them brings me a lot of joy. Being with my friends, being with you all as my spiritual community is part of that too. How do I get over my fear of taking political action when everything seems hopeless? I think it's easy to feel, I know it's easy to feel overwhelmed, and it's easy to feel like, what's the point? And for me, it's a question of how do I continue working, knowing that what I do may or may not be making a difference. And for me, it's important to continue anyways, because otherwise I've given up. Otherwise, I've let evil forces win. I've let systems of oppression win. Otherwise, I've not remembered my own dignity and the dignity of my communities. think Adrienne Marie Brown has some good stuff to say about this, and the person who's working on like climate grief and climate work, who says like, we have probably missed the boat. Our world is probably going to change drastically as we know it because of our actions as people. But how do we continue moving forward? How do we have a great turning of the tide towards justice and love, even knowing that all of that is true? And if anyone else knows her name, yeah, Joanna Macy. She's got some good stuff. All right, we have another paired question. How can we as individuals help the homeless people who are experiencing addiction here in Boston, especially near Boston Medical Center in Southampton Street? And what can we as individuals do to relieve the stress and anguish of migrant families on our southern border? So there are definitely some good resources if you connect with groups that are already doing this work. There are groups that are doing this work like RICES, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, groups here in Boston, Beyond, which is working not only like for the people who are impacted, but with them and being led by them in terms of saying like, who's impacted, what do you need, rather than assuming that I, as someone who is not experiencing this situation, know what they need, to be able to ask and then say like, oh, you're asking for money right now, let me send what money I can. Oh, you're asking me to show up in a protest, let me show up to the protest if I can. Oh, you're asking for a supply drive, let me see if I can help that supply drive. And also having conversations with people who you might disagree with, which we'll get to more in a minute. And in terms of like individuals that you might meet on the street, I know that one of the big things that happens when someone comes up to you on the street, when someone comes up to you on the street and says, you know, can I have some money? To ignore them says, you don't matter, you're not a person, you don't count. And so I often will choose to give somebody a little bit of cash because Reverend Kim once said to me when we were passing someone in this situation, she said, he's working really hard. I'm like, yeah, you have to be pretty hard up on your luck to be needing to beg. That's hard work. I know we have people in our congregation who have been in that position or are currently in that position. And like, yeah, that's hard work. And if you have other feedback for me, feel free to let me know after service. But to be able to have that human connection. And if somebody is talking about being addicted, to just support them for who they are. For some people who are experiencing addiction, it's like, I just need to get through the day, and this is what gets me through the day. And so to be able to honor that. For some people, they might say like, oh, I had sobriety for this time. You can say like, what got you through that time? Or what would help right now? How to love and enjoy time with family members who have radically different ideas on what's important in the world. How to live with an open heart. How do I open my heart to Republicans? How to communicate with people with whom you disagree strongly. So there's an idea called relational cultural theory that says that It's easy to coast along and say, like, what are our similarities, and just pretend that we agree and everything's fine. And instead, but that's kind of a surface level false thing, and if you've done that, you might feel that tension of like, I know there's this elephant in the room. And so instead, if you can name the elephant and talk about it, and it can be really hard to talk about it in a way that's we're not trying to convince each other, because we're probably not going to convince each other. But to name it, at least, can allow us to go deeper, to know each other more deeply. And that allows more real intimacy. And real intimacy is what lets us change with somebody and lets us be impacted by somebody. So maybe that real intimacy would allow someone to know us enough that they might hear what we're saying differently and move towards change. It can also be fine to just say, there's that elephant in the room, and we're going to focus on the grandkids. We're going to focus on going out to listen to this concert together. It's also important to figure out where the actual openings are. Maybe there's no real opening with your relative who is so close-minded and never, ever going to hear what you have to say. But maybe there's an opening with your coworker. I had somebody that I was meeting the other day, and he said something about being glad for cops who had helped him with something, and being glad that we have the institution of police to keep us all from speeding and breaking traffic laws. And I said, you want to kind of try and use a yes and frame. So I said, yeah, I agree that we need accountability so that we're going to keep each other from being reckless drivers. I disagree that the police are the institution to do that, because I know how often police are targeting people of color in a way that is so much worse than what they're showing to us who are white folks. And the guy said, oh, yeah, I agree with you. Which is, maybe a little simplistic of a situation, but it was a time when I felt like, I don't know how this person is, but I'm gonna try. And that conversation did open up into a new place, where instead of just saying, yeah, police are great because they keep us from speeding, this person was now saying, yeah, we need a system. The police are not the system that we need. All right, we have not quite gotten to all of them, but I'm going to close with this one. How does a minister keep a positive attitude when sad and negative things are shared with them? For me, I believe deeply that we are all broken and we are whole at the same time. So when there is pain in your life or my life, I also believe that we can be bigger than that pain. When there is injustice, I also believe that there can be movement towards justice. When there's tragedy, I also believe that we can be bigger than the tragedy. And I believe that the pain is really important. We can't rush through pain, we can't rush through grief. If we do, it just gets stuck inside of us, and that is no good. So as your minister and as a fellow human being, I believe and I commend to you the practice that it is important to just let things be terrible sometimes, and that allows us to go through it and get to a place of joy. That's a downer, though, so let's end with this one. What are some of your favorite hymns or chants? Yeah. I've got like a million. My hymnal has little flags in it, and it's about every other page that is flagged. But I, in this moment, am really looking forward to singing The Fire of Commitment together, because I love how it has that upbeat beat. I love how it has some forward movement, and I love that the words are both about our own commitments and about being together in community, which is what we are all about. Amen. I invite you to join hands across the aisles for the benediction. Let's sing. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. For your people are my people. Your people are mine. Your people are my people. Your divine, my divine. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. For your people are my people. Your people are mine. Your people are my people. Your divine, my divine. All right, friends, if you're up for it one more time in the heat and you're comfortable, I invite you to join hands across the aisles. If you wanted to just place them on your heart, you're welcome to. My beloveds, may you find your path in life that brings you more deeply into who you are, into what makes your heart come alive. May you find people and space here that bring you more deeply into community, into knowing one another, being known for all of who you are. And may being in good community bring you out into the world more fully into justice in your life, in the lives of the people you touch, and in our great, great world. Service begins when the service ends. I love you. Bless your hearts. Amen.
Please visit ascboston.org for more information about this historic Unitarian Universalist congregation. Arlington Street Church, gathered in love and service for justice and peace.